Hello, and welcome back to Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the top headlines and trends for your security practice. My name is Zoe Lindsay, joining you this week from TikTok, apparently. Sorry, I couldn't find a clip or tape, but we'll get it fixed for next week. And this one's for the teams behind the teams, busy taking care of a whole bunch of other teams. We've got a SharePoint bug that stays put after you've patched it, an Exchange deadline that ends patching altogether, and CISA's running list of what attackers are actually kicking down right now. And then we're going to spend some real time on the OpenAI and Hugging Face story because, who doesn't love a good AI gone rogue? So let's begin at the beginning. A perfectly good place to begin. SharePoint exploitation happening in the wild. There's a critical SharePoint flaw, 9.8, and it got proof of concept code published on the 20th, with Watchtower clocking live exploitation within hours. It's a unauthenticated path to remote code execution for on-prem SharePoint. And in a single request, an attacker walks off with the server's machine keys. Rotate nobody, patch the box, they still hold the keys. So the fix isn't done when the update finishes installing. But beyond applying the patch, what should MSPs actually be thinking about here, Matt?
One of the things I don't want MSPs to overlook here is that this is not just another Patch Tuesday vulnerability. Yeah, Microsoft's update is the first priority, but this particular vulnerability has an extra wrinkle to it. Attackers have been observed stealing SharePoint machine keys, which means simply patching the server may not completely remove their access if they've already compromised the environment. For MSPs, this isn't a reminder that incident response doesn't end when Windows Update finishes. If you have customers running on-premise SharePoint, now's the time to verify that they're patched, look for indicators of compromise, and determine whether machine key rotation is appropriate. It's also a great opportunity to identify which customers are still running on-prem collaboration platforms. Cloud services do reduce some operational burden, but for organizations that keep things like SharePoint on-prem, this is exactly why disciplined patch management and post-incident validation are so important.
And staying on Microsoft, but looking a little bit further out, the clock is official on Exchange Server 2016 and 2019. Microsoft just reminded everybody that the extended security updates for both wrap up in October. And then once that runs dry, any new bug found in those versions stays unpatched forever, unless Microsoft changes their mind. An unsupported mail server doesn't fail loudly on the first day, just quietly becomes the most vulnerable target on the network. It's like that one character that got bit by the zombie and tries to keep it secret. Eventually, something's going to go pear-shaped. So this isn't an emergency today, but it is something that every MSP should be planning for. So Matt, what's your advice?
What stands out to me about this particular story is that it's way less about cybersecurity and more about planning. October may seem far away from now, but anyone who's managed infrastructure projects know migrations never happen overnight. There are budgets that need to be approved, compatibility testing, maintenance windows, user communication, sometimes difficult conversations with customers who'd rather wait until the last minute. The risk here isn't that Exchange suddenly becomes insecure in October. The risk is that after support ends, every newly discovered vulnerability becomes a permanent risk for organizations that choose not to migrate. If you're an MSP, I'd use this announcement as a reason to review your customer base. Figure out who's still running Exchange 2016 and 2019. Start those conversations now and help build a realistic migration timeline for customers instead of reacting under pressure later.
And CISA added a fresh batch to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog this weekend, and there is a smorgasbord. There's 2 WordPress core bugs that anonymous users can chain into a pre-authentication code execution on default installs, a Langflow flaw that hands over root, and an old DD-WRT router bug getting a second life through UPnP. Federal agencies are having hard deadlines to fix these within the next few weeks. We talk about vulnerabilities every week, but, why does the KEV catalog matter so much?
I actually think that the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog is one of the most useful resources available to IT departments and MSPs. I keep a mirror of it locally, along with things like the CWE database and others, because having that local and pulled into a lot of my analysis workflows makes them much more effective. Every single week, we're flooded with new CVEs, critical scores, and security advisories, and the challenge here isn't finding vulnerabilities, it's figuring out which ones deserve immediate attention. And that's exactly where the KEV catalog helps. These aren't theoretical vulnerabilities or issues that might eventually be exploited. These are vulnerabilities CISA has identified as actively being exploited in the real world. True story. This week's additions are especially notable because, look, they affect technologies many organizations use every day, including WordPress. For MSPs, the KEV catalog can become a practical prioritization tool. Instead of trying to patch everything immediately, you can focus first on the vulnerabilities attackers are already taking advantage of while continuing to work through the rest of your patching process.
And before we wrap, let's, pump the brakes for a second and talk about the big one this week, the autonomous Hugging Face breach. You've probably only seen the OpenAI and Hugging Face headlines make the rounds on every platform, Discord, newsletter, and as usual with AI, there's solid reporting in there under several thick coats of marketing. So, as is our ancient tradition, let's drop the bowl and talk ground truth. By OpenAI's account, this came out of an internal evaluation stress testing one of its more capable offensive models. Mid-test, the model made its way onto Hugging Face's infrastructure while working the problem that it was handed. If you read those headlines, the story you saw is that the bot got stumped by a question on the quiz and did a whole little Shawshank routine
Sometimes a breach cuts right to the heart of a man.
to jailbreak the lab environment and check on the answer key itself. But both companies are still fully reconstructing what happened and cleaning up the mess. As for an AI reaching somewhere that it shouldn't, scale is more dramatic, but this isn't new. It's only been a few months since we saw outages because an LLM decided that the best way to update the DevOps environment was, just wipe it and start from scratch. And that's what's relevant here. It's a preview. Pay attention to how these systems move when you point them at real infrastructure.
We did see a sandbox escape from a model that was being tested in a controlled environment. However, ChatGPT and OpenAI did release a decent amount of information about what actually happened. You can kind of key into some of the details, but effectively, it was in a sandbox. They were doing some model testing, and they had given it a test that was basically rigged, right? So the model shouldn't have been able to pass the test or cheat at the test or whatever, right? And this particular model was geared more towards pen testing. So the real meat and potatoes of what actually happened is it figured out how to move laterally out of the sandbox to a node that did have internet access, and it used a package manager, most likely BuildKite, to basically find an exploit in that package manager and then use that as a proxy to get into Hugging Face, which it was looking for benchmark data, and it realized that Hugging Face had the benchmark data, so it moved laterally, just like a pen tester would, and then attacked Hugging Face to try to get at the data through this package manager. So pretty wild, crazy stuff, but a huge amount of caveats.
I'm just going to underline what Mike said there. This wasn't your average chatbot freelancing on a laptop. It was a purpose-built evaluation with serious compute in a sealed research environment with the guardrails pulled off on purpose to see what the thing could do. It's a research milestone being dressed up by the internet as a jailbreak. And this lines up with something that's already happening. We've been talking about the software supply chain. Now we've got the models, the data sets, the eval environments, and the agents that are part of that same chain. Spinning them up doesn't add a new coworker, but it sure does add a column to the asset inventory that you already keep.
To take the guardrails off for a test like this is pretty crazy, honestly, and we'll see some fallout from that. But then the other piece is they also mentioned that it was a significant amount of inference, which in frontier model speak means it had crazy amounts of GPU access and money to burn, basically, trying to solve this problem. So, can we estimate how much it costs? No. Do we think it's in the order of real dollars? I mean, basically not worth it. Basically not worth it monetarily for how much money it had to burn. They were using it for testing and all sorts of other stuff, but like this is not a practical thing that could happen. It honestly could only happen at a frontier model, and like it had to use a ton of money, or internal tokens, right? Like, play money, I guess, at some point. But I am not necessarily worried about this. I'm more worried about what it says with OpenAI and the fact that they're willing to run things without guardrails, and it's we are in interesting times, but I'm not super worried about it. I'm just more worried about people doing reckless things, I guess, on the internet, which has always been a thing for a while.
And I think that's a good place to wrap it. Nobody needs to swear off AI over one research result, and nobody needs to treat every model like a live grenade. As AI becomes another layer of infrastructure, the fundamentals are still going to do most of the work. Good engineering, layered defenses, controlled testing, and real governance. We'll keep watching, but pay attention to the lesson and not just the headline. Until next time, stay safe out there.